So I have some time today, and it's been on my mind for a minute to kind of talk about this, but figured that since I had some time, because I'm driving to a prison ministry breakfast this morning, to share my thoughts on the matter, because I think it's a voice that's not being heard, or it's an opinion that I at least haven't heard shared. So when it comes to DEI, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I have always been a supporter of the idea, but I have never been a fan of the execution or the reality of what it created. And I'm going to walk through each one because I think we group them all together, and each one is individually different, right? So to start with diversity should mean that based on the skills required for a job, right, and the skills and the abilities and the qualifications that are required for someone to be effective at doing a job, that you are not discriminatory in your hiring practices, and that there is an intentionality about making sure that you're not just hiring on purpose a homogenous group of people. Like, in my mind, that's what diversity should mean, right? So diversity isn't just demographics in a box that you're trying to hire more women, or you're trying to hire more men, or or that you're trying to hire more minorities or underrepresented groups. Diversity means, or it should mean, that we want people who come from different backgrounds, people who have different beliefs and different ways of thinking. Like, the root word of diversity is diverte, which actually means to disrupt, right? It basically means to be different. But even within the guise of hiring people who are different, organizations, any successful organization, any healthy organization needs to have a culture, right? So you want people who think differently, but you still have to have a solid organizational culture that has some values, that has some principles that it stands for. Chick-fil-A is a good example of that. But the best example of that is the military, right? The military is a diverse organization that almost has an overrepresentation of minority groups in it. But the reason that it's effective is because the military has a very strong culture. You can be from whatever background you want to be from. You can be, you don't even have, you can be a naturalized immigrant. You can be somebody who's Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish. It doesn't matter. Like, the military is like, you can come in here, but understand we have a culture, and we're going to like attempt to train everybody and to meld everybody into that culture, whether you like it or not, right? But the military is a diverse organization. So that's what diversity should be, right? But what diversity became in the execution of this, so again, that's why I say I support the idea, but in the execution of it, because people were reactionary, because a lot of organizations were afraid of being perceived as racist or being perceived as being discriminatory, what it became was people sitting in meetings, and I know this as someone who's been an executive for the last 12 years, is sitting in a room and someone saying, well, the next person we hire has to be a minority because this group has too many white people in it. Or there are too many males in this organization, so we need to hire some more females. But then the interesting thing is I never heard the reverse. So for instance, there are a couple of departments. Human resources, for instance, is normally an overrepresented organization that is female. Marketing, for instance, is normally an overrepresented organization that is female. I've never heard it come up that those organizations should be less female. I never heard that, like, the next recruiter we hire should be a man, or the next HR specialist we hire should be a man. But when it came to engineering, when it came to sales, when it came to some other roles, there was like this very intentional thing that we're going to appear to be discriminatory if we don't make sure that we like bring in a token person into this role. And the reason that bothers me is because as a black man, as someone who became an executive in his early 30s, as someone who was that rumors circulated around organizations that I was a DEI hire, right? That I was in my position because they wanted to add a black person to the executive team, and not that I was actually good at what I did. When diversity is done intentionally at the disregard of skill or experience or fit or leadership capability, you're just setting that person up, right? So I have never been hired because I was black. I have never been hired because I was young. I've never applied for a job to be an executive. I was promoted into several executive roles because I'm good at what I do. right? I was promoted because I was competent. I was promoted because I was exceptional. I was promoted because I worked hard. I remember my boss walking into my office one day, and I just realized that he didn't even know what I had degrees in, because my work spoke for itself. And then that's why I got promoted, right? So when it comes to diversity, like, you want people who are competent, you want to have skills, but you also want to be intentional about making sure that you're not discriminating. And so one of the ways that a lot of organizations discriminate is in their qualifications that are on paper that are not in practice. And I consult with field service organizations where this is most prevalent. Is most field service organizations say that you need an associate's degree to be a technician and you need a bachelor's degree to be a manager. But in practice, most of their technicians don't have associate's degrees, they have high school diplomas. And most of their managers don't have bachelor's degrees because they came up through the ranks. So when you look at that, it would actually seem like on paper that these organizations may not be getting the type of candidates that they want. But the reason people aren't applying is because even your existing technicians don't meet those qualifications. But at some point, probably not intentionally, just by borrowing a templated field service post from somewhere else, in practice, you're actually discriminating against the kind of people that you want to hire because they're the kind of employees that you already have. Because what people fail to realize, and this is documented in multiple places, I know Adam Grant said it in one of his books, minorities are less likely, underrepresented groups are less likely to apply for a job that we don't meet the requirements for, right? That we don't meet the qualifications for. So if it says that an associate's degree is preferred or required, I may not even apply when I don't know your entire organization doesn't even have an associate's degree. That's why when referrals or networking, you'll get a lot of people who will wind up applying for jobs that they otherwise would not have because of the fact that somebody told them, oh, don't worry about it. Like, I don't have a degree either, and they hired me. Like, I don't have an associate's and they hired me. That's not a real requirement. So, and I consult with organizations on this all the time. If you want to diversify your organization, one of the first things you normally need to check is your job descriptions and your job postings, because you're unintentionally discriminating because minorities are not going to apply for jobs that they're not qualified for, because we are raised that if you don't exceed the requirements, if you don't exceed the minimum, then you're not going to be successful because you're a person of color, especially as a black man. Like, that is something we are constantly told, right? Like, we got to be 120% better. So in that regard, which at the end of the day, it's actually not true, but it's something that culturally we're taught, because I've hired people of all colors that didn't meet the exact qualifications as a manager. So have my white managers, my Hispanic managers, my immigrant managers, right? But when you're taught that way, when it's something that's culturally received, and it's just a part of your unconscious way that you process an application and the way that you look at a job posting, then people are not going to apply. And so you're going to have a homogenous group of people applying. And so those are the ones that you're going to hire, and you're not going to achieve diversity. So in action, right, in practice, diversity should have looked at standards for employment. Diversity should have reviewed the screening process. Diversity should have make sure that they articulated the organizational culture in a way that it was tangible and visible to people. And diversity should have focused on establishing reasonable standards, right? Not less than reasonable, not sacrificing skills for demographics, but establishing reasonable standards and having a culture of training that allows you to bring in people who previously probably didn't have access or weren't previously in the industry. And again, military is a good example of that. Military is a skills-based recruiting organization, right, that has reasonable standards for entry, has a strong culture, and has a significant focus on training, right? I say this all the time. The military is a giant trade school with a very strong culture, but they will bring you in. When I went into the military, I had just finished 5 years of college. They didn't care. You were going through the basics, right? They didn't care if I had a background, I had learned calculus and all that other stuff. You're going to learn military math the way we teach everybody else military math. And our lack of ability to start from the beginning and then to be able to build in that way is why a lot of us have been hiring, say, like for like, because our training programs aren't well built. So we have to hire people that have experience. But history could have been discriminatory, right? History was discriminatory when it comes to trade unions. History was discriminatory when it came to women in certain industries. So when you're looking for experience in itself, the history that you're seeking for people to have could have actually discriminated against the type of people that you now want to diversify your organization with. So that's just diversity, right? And everybody's having 60-minute sound bites about DEI or 60-second sound bites. That's 10 minutes just on diversity. So let's go to equity. When it comes to equity, equity should mean that people are being paid fairly based on a variety of factors, right? So, and I can't name all six. There are 6 of them that I know for a fact are protected, like when it comes to EEOC complaints and all of that other stuff. So I know education is one of the things that can dictate someone being paid more for the same job. Experience is another one. Cost of living or location is another one. Specialization is another one, right? Like if somebody works in a particular setting, maybe they work on a particular type of equipment that requires different things. But then there are other things like certifications and things of that nature as well. So when it comes to equity, one of the problems that we had is that I think a lot of organizations started saying equal is the same as equity, right? So you do the same job, so your pay should be equal. And again, support the idea of making sure people are equitably paid, but a lot of organizations created hyperinflation in pay when they just started equalizing everybody's pay. Because there's a reason why somebody was being paid more. Maybe they've been here for 12 years, right? Maybe they have a unique skill set. Maybe they have a degree. Maybe they live in an area where the cost of living is high. Maybe they have a level of expertise on a particular product or in a particular subject that makes them more valuable. And I mean, from a revenue generating perspective, makes them more valuable as an employee. And so if we're not focused on those aspects of equity, and we're just saying, hey, and a lot of millennials, we're guilty of this. I'm a millennial. Like, we start a job and I hear a lot of people saying, well, this person making, 72 and they brought me in at 65. But when that person started at 45. And now the starting salary has gone up $20,000 and they looking at you like, do you know when I started that job, I was making 45 and they done brought this person in at 65? Because that's another thing about equity, right? Like, companies increase their starting salary range year over year. So you're already coming in very much likely at a higher rate than the other people who started that job. And just because you're doing the same job does not mean you should get equal pay. I know some people may disagree with that, but I don't think that's true, right? Like, if someone's been doing the job for 20 years and you've been doing it for 20 minutes, y'all shouldn't be getting paid the same amount of money. It's not a union mentality. It's a fact that that person has added value to the organization. So the organization has increased their pay and has paid them based on their performance and has given them merit increases that validates why they're getting paid that much money. Right? And so when it comes to equity, I'll give you personal examples, right? I remember I started as a technician. I was getting paid $52,000 a year. Maybe 4 or 5 months after I started, they bumped up the minimum salary to 58. I was still getting paid 52, but I was doing my job well. So they were like, hey, Roy can't be training people who are making 58. So then they bumped me up to 58. And I'd only been at the company for like 6 months, right? But they were intentional about from an equity perspective. But if I wasn't performing well, if I wasn't the one helping to train the new people, I don't think they would have given me a bump, right? I had an opportunity to negotiate my salary. The market was very thin, so they had to do a lot to try to improve their recruiting and be able to hire more people. So they bumped up their minimum salary. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we think everyone should just be paid equal, what you wind up creating is an inflation in the cost of labor, right? In the cost of goods sold, in the cost of service delivery, in the cost of execution. And now you just have a bunch of overpaid people and you don't have any delineation between like, what is the organization rewarding? If we're all getting paid the same amount of money and I worked here 20 years and you worked here 10 minutes, then like the company's not rewarding loyalty, the company's not rewarding seniority, the company's not rewarding consistency and somebody being here. When I first got promoted to be a manager, probably less than a year into being in my career in field service, I had technicians that made more money than me. And I remember talking to somebody and they were like, that doesn't bother you? And how did, man, you got employees who make more money than you. And I'm like, I have employees who've worked here for 32 years. If they didn't make more money than me, I'd probably go complain on their behalf because that's not equitable. I've been here for 10 months, right? Like, yeah, I'm a manager, but I don't think I contribute so much more that I should be getting paid more a day into my job as a manager, right? And I'm also a new manager. So I was a new manager, still new at the company. I had no problem at all that probably like half of my employees made more money than me. And not only that, they were eligible for overtime. So they were pulling in, some of them were pulling in like 1.5 times my salary. And I was fine with that because I understand what equity is supposed to be, right? Like they were being paid what they were worth based on their experience, their location, their technical expertise, their seniority. There were reasons why they were being paid more than me. It wasn't like we hired a brand new technician and I'm paying them more than I was making. It's not true. I made more than a new technician, but I made less than an experienced manager. We had managers that had 20 years of experience. I would expect them to make more money than me, but that's because I'm a reasonable person. So like, I think it's unreasonable to assume that you should just get paid the same because someone else is doing the same job, because just doing the job is what gets you the base salary, the starting salary, and that starting range of a salary, right? And then the same applied when I became an executive. I became an executive in my early 30s. I was a young executive. I didn't have experience as an executive. So I expected to be one of the lowest paid executives, but it didn't stay that way because over the years, I wound up being one of the highest paid people on the leadership team, right? Because I proved that I was worth the value, right? And so maybe my salary didn't go up by 3%, but it went up by 8% here and 10% here. And there was a promotion here and a jump there because I was good at my job. Nobody was trying to like make sure that Roy, who had 2 years of experience, and was getting paid the same as the other guy who maybe ran engineering for 20 years, because I wouldn't have thought that was fair, right? And so there's a from an equity perspective, there's an idea of fairness and equality, not equity, that I think in practice messed up the E in equity, right? Like we should have been making sure that people weren't being underpaid based on their experience, their location, not that, hey, I just started and now we all have the same title, so let me equalize pay. Because I've seen that in practice. I've seen people go like, oh, like this woman is being paid less than this man, so let's fix their salary. Or these people are like, no, like don't do that. Because now the person who's been here for 12 years is gonna be like, why have I still been here? Like you just took somebody that started 2 days ago and gave them the same amount of money that you gave me. Or you don't go back, and from an equity perspective, I do think organizations need to look at what your starting salary is now. And if you have well-performing employees that are below your starting salary, then you are not equitably paying them. You're not. Like, even though it doesn't matter. Like, if you will pay a brand new person who you have to take the risk and the chance on whether or not they have any godly idea on what they're doing, then you should make sure that all of your existing employees, at a minimum, are at least making the starting salary, which was an equity adjustment I've had to make in organizations that I've run, because one of the first things that I look at, I know we continually increase the salary, but what we're paying new employees in the market should not exceed what we're paying existing employees, because that is not equitable, especially from a geography perspective. Sometimes starting salaries are different based on geography. So that's 8 minutes on equity. And again, I'll give you an example. Military is good at equity. When I joined the military, I had 2 college degrees. It did not matter. I went in as an enlisted E3. You know what? We all made the same amount of money, right? Like I was an E4, we made the same amount of money. There's a little bit of cost of living adjustment as you earn more skills, as you move your way up. Like the military has an equitable pay system, right? Because they're paying people based on performance, based on experience, based on training, based on location, right? That's how equity should work. There's a lot of things we should learn. There's some stuff we shouldn't take from the military, but when it comes to that, that's definitely something that we should learn. So that's almost 9 minutes just on equity, all right? Again, I know you listen to a lot of 60-second sound bites on all 3. I appreciate you if you're still here. Inclusion. So inclusion should mean, right? And I think when people thought about this, when it should mean that people should not feel uncomfortable for being their authentic selves at work, right? That I should be able to feel included and not to feel ostracized, not to feel otherized when I'm at work, when I'm in a company setting. And I think that's true, right? I talk about authenticity in my book, The Art of Leading. It's in our leadership training. It's in my consulting practices. Like I talk about authenticity, and which is what I think inclusion was trying to achieve, right? I think inclusion was trying to achieve that people should be able to be their authentic selves at work. But where I think that went wrong is at the sacrifice of having some kind of standard and some kind of expectation of what an organizational culture should be, right? And at the end of the day, authenticity requires a level of transparency and communication from me, the individual, but it should also be based on the fact that I want people to get to know me, not that I want, that I want my culture to be supreme, that I want my culture to be primary, that I want my culture to be recognized or applauded. I just want to be able to be known as an individual and not discriminated against because of the fact that I may not be the same as the majority or the homogenous culture, right? Chick-fil-A is a good example of that. Chick-fil-A is like an unapologetically traditional kind of Christian conservative organization, but Chick-fil-A operators can come from any space of life, right? They can come from any sexual orientation, religious background, they don't discriminate in that regard. Like, you can operate a Chick-fil-A if you are not a conservative Christian. But Chick-fil-A is not changing their organizational culture for those individuals because they realize that their culture is one of the things that drives their organization. So you can come here. We're not going to discriminate against you. We will include you as an individual. We will respect and honor your individuality. But this is our organizational culture. And if you are comfortable enough to be here, that's fine. And then we'll get to understand you. We'll get to know you from an inclusion perspective. So where I think inclusion goes wrong is when it becomes like this forced kind of push of trying to denigrate one culture at the sacrifice of another, right? And these performative fake apologetic tones, like the organizations who make Black History Month statements but have all white leadership teams, or the companies that pivoted real strong to celebrate Juneteenth and give people the day off, but they didn't know what the holiday was the day before, right? Or organizations that were built on traditional Christian values that try to stray away from celebrating Easter or Christmas or some of the holidays associated with it. It's like when you start to lose your cultural identity as an organization, if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything, right? And so, yes, I do think that there should be an intentionality about getting to know the differences about the people who are in your organization. But when it becomes just these generic, Native American History Month, but none of your Native Americans are speaking, or it's Black History Month, but you don't actually give an opportunity for any of the Black people in your organization to share their cultures, because Black people come from different cultures, right? I'm half Jamaican and I'm half African American. So my father is an immigrant from Jamaica and my mom is a descendant of slaves from North Carolina and South Carolina. But I've had Haitian employees. I had employees from Ghana, from Guyana, from Egypt, from Ethiopia, from Pakistan, from Puerto Rico, from Italy. I've had employees from all over the world. Somebody's getting left out in one of these celebrations, but it would be better just to authentically get to know the individuals that are there and make sure that you're not intentionally trying to exclude them, because some people are not going to feel connected to an activity because it's not a part of their culture. So for instance, a lot of executives and a lot of I'll give you just from a male perspective, right? As a man, I don't watch sports. I haven't since I was 16 years old. I don't drink. I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink wine. I don't drink whiskey. I don't drink beer. I don't drink alcohol at all, right? I don't have a favorite sports team. So there's some people that don't watch, but I don't have a favorite sports team. I don't play golf. I don't exercise regularly. I don't go running. I don't own a bike. I don't go skiing. All of those things are things that are almost expected in certain executive spaces, right? That you're at a conference and then everybody goes for drinks, but I don't drink, right? We're at an outing and everybody wants to go biking or hiking, but I don't do that, right? I have autoimmune diseases. If my muscle tissue breaks down, all my organs will shut down and I'll die. So there's some physical activity that I avoid for very specific reasons. And I apologize for the sun, but I'm driving obviously. But with that, and then even culturally, right? I became an executive in my early 30s. I'm a Black Jamaican from the inner city who was a Christian hip hop artist. I'm also a pastor, so I'm a devout Christian Like, you know, I'm a father and a husband. Like, my family homeschools, right? I do a ton of community service. Like, I don't fit in almost any environment, right? Like, I'm a pastor who's been a technology executive for a long time, right? I was a hip hop artist that was around a bunch of starving artists when I had a 6-figure salary, right, as an executive. So, like, I've never really felt fully included in any environment because we're not monolithic individuals, right? Like, we're very complex individuals. And the thing is that should be okay. Like, it should be okay for us to be different. What shouldn't be okay is for it to be an uncomfortable environment for people to learn about one another, right? And what I don't like about what DEI did is it put so many people on guard. It put so many people on eggshells that they were afraid to ask even cultural questions, right? Like, well, here's somebody with an accent and now it feels racist regardless of what your color is, to be like, oh man, like, what ethnicity are you, or where is your family from, right? No, maybe you are born in the United States. That's not my question, but you have an accent that tells me you speak another language. So, like, where does your family come from? Like, and it's not like, oh, no, I can understand a lot of different accents. My grandma speaks patois, right? I've had a lot of employees from different countries, but I love to learn about people's cultures. I love to learn about the language and the food and the traditions and all that. But it's gotten to the point to where it's so uncomfortable to ask that question. People don't know whether to say black or African American or how should you refer to somebody. And then, you know, we get into the dynamics of like individual pronouns. Like, I wouldn't know what pronoun to call you unless I knew you, right? Because if I don't know you, I just see your name on your name tag, and then now I'm addressing you as such. So it's like, we created an environment where people became afraid to ask a question because it's perceived that you're asking the question and it means to otherize somebody, instead of I'm asking a question because I actually want to get to know you. Like, I want to know more about your culture. I want to know more about your background. And one of the things that I say, like, early in my book is that I think one of the things that inclusion did is if you give everyone a seat at the table, but everybody at the table doesn't have a microphone, then it's a cruel illusion, right? Because when it comes to, and I made a video a few years ago, and there's a bunch of stuff on my YouTube channel that I made, but and I'll end with this, right? When it comes to DEI, when it comes to like introducing diverse individuals, right? Underrepresented groups, minority groups into the main. The difference between tokenism, and I call it, there's a difference between being a token and being a totem, right? People who don't know, right? Like, a totem pole is, you know, something that's used, you know, in different cultures, but you'll see it, it's prevalent in Native American culture. And a totem pole has different kind of heads on it, right? And each head is representing a different part of a story, right? And so, like, totem poles tell stories. So tokens, on the other hand, right? Whether you talk about a token to get on the train, or a token to you know, a token to get on a ride, or tokens just give you access. Like, that's it, right? There's nothing special about it. It gives you access. And so the difference between being a token, if people only let you in the room, but your presence doesn't change the story because your voice isn't heard, then you're a token. And that's a failed attempt at DEI. That's a failed attempt at probably some corporate policy on affirmative action and just adding some people of color or adding some women to a team. Because if the culture of the organization is not ready to change its story, right, and to include your voice in the story, then you are just a token. But if you're a totem, that means when your head is introduced onto that totem pole, when your head is introduced, when your mind, when your thoughts, when your voice, when your perspective is added into that, it adds to the overall story of the organization, right? So organizations did a lot of tokenism. There are organizations that were very good at being a totem, and I can say that from in my career, and I thank Swisslog, right, for giving me an opportunity, for being somebody who was young, who was just different. But I loved what I did. I love field service. I love my employees. I love our industry, that we were helping people and taking care of kids and NICUs and visiting burn units and cancer centers. Like, I had a passion for what I did. They recognized that, and a lot of people actually stepped aside to say, I think Roy could do this job great. Thanks for Bob Rasmussen for doing that, and the person who got me my first VP role, who was like, Roy, I think you would do great at this. I'm going to retire so that you can step into it. And that was amazing for them to do that, And I proved the fact that, it gave me an opportunity, but they didn't give me an opportunity because I was black. They didn't give me an opportunity because I was young. They gave me an opportunity because I was passionate and I loved what I did. And so they let me step into a role early and give me an opportunity to prove myself. And I did, right? And I've continued to do that. And I would expect anybody given an opportunity to do that. So, but I was able to change the story of the organization, right? I had a voice, right? I had influence. I was, and then I moved up through the organization and was on the executive leadership team and things of this nature. And, topics would come up and heads would turn to look to Roy because I represented the largest group in the company, right? I represented the most employees because field service organizations are large people groups, right? And I represented the most diverse organization in the country. So when we had conversations around things that we were going to do, I was a voice that they listened to. So that is 30 minutes of explaining diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those that stayed the whole time, I appreciate you staying and listening. For those that left early, that's fine. I hope no one left a comment without listening, because, if you didn't make it this far, you don't have the attention span to listen, then I'm just going to ignore the comment anyway. So thank you for listening. That is why I have always been a supporter of making sure you remove obstacles, that you're paying people fairly based on their qualifications, their location, their experience, and all of that other stuff, and that people are allowed to be their authentic selves at work without fear of persecution or being otherized or anything else, and that they could be vulnerable and that they could be transparent. So that's DEI to me. But that's not how DEI was executed in the majority of organizations. And as a consultant, as somebody that's worked in the industry across different different segments of the industry, I can tell you for a fact that's not how it was executed in most places, which is why we are where we are. And a lot of it is getting reversed because it was performative, and it wound up being, like I said from that example, like, hey, we got to get some more women in here. We got to get some more people in color in here, and not actually really caring about the people that you were bringing in. Because if they weren't there, either your requirements were wrong or your culture was wrong, and you should have fixed your requirements and fixed your culture before you try to introduce people just so you can check something off of a box. But that's all I've got. You all have a great day.